This is Global Solutions, recoupling the world. This session is Germany's G20 presidency, implications for global governance. This session is moderated by journalist Declan Curry.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all of you and welcome to our discussion on Germany's G20 presidency, the implications for global governance. We're going to hear today from those who are shaping and implementing Germany's policy agenda for the G20 as its current president. We will also hear from those who are preparing the policy agenda for the next G20 president, that is Argentina. We will bring you a global perspective from major policy thinkers from 4 continents, and I hope that we will also have your input. We welcome your engagement, your involvement, so please do not hesitate to join in when we ask for your contributions. As always, greater value is derived from contributions that are concise and to the point. But we start with an update on what Germany's policy agenda is for the G20 and what it hopes to achieve. Please welcome with some opening remarks the G7 and G20 Sherpa and the Chief Economic Advisor to Chancellor Merkel, Lars-Hendrik Röller.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. In fact, I know this place very well. I used to be, I think it was called the president of the ESMT, which is housed in this building, which was, top international business school in Germany. And I feel back home, if you want. So I'm very happy to be here. But the topic is the G20, or in particular the T20/Global Solutions. So I want to thank Dennis and Mr. Messner for organizing this. We've been very actively working with them right through the German presidency, which started on December 1st. It always starts, at the end of the previous year, and sort of has its highlight in July 7th and 8th in Hamburg, actually very soon, a little more than a month. And then, we have some other events after that as far as the G20 is concerned, but, most of the work is sort of hopefully accomplished. Then, of course, we also have elections in Germany after that. And then we are very much looking forward to Argentina. Argentinian Sherpa Beatriz, who's also here today, will say something about how things are going next year. And I think it's very important. I have 4 points to make on the G20. Very important to have a certain continuity. It's a presidential-driven process. We don't want institutional structures to create new institutional structures. We have plenty of those. But the continuity of the G20 process is very important. And therefore, I'm very happy and welcome Beatrice. And of course, the German government will be fully supportive of the Argentinian agenda. Of course, expecting full support also from the Argentinians, which I think we have for the German agenda. One more preliminary remarks, and then I make my 4 points, is that, we just had a G7 meeting finishing, which was interesting, and I think that is something where we worked very hard. This was, of course, Italian leadership. You may have looked at the communiqué. The communiqué is one thing which you produce at these summits. The other thing is, of course, the discussion, the bilaterals, and the possibility of engaging, which, of course, is not public. And that part of it is actually very important. The G7 is a much smaller format. And we now need to build on that. And of course, the G20 is much larger. You got important countries like Brazil and others in the G20, which are now going to weigh in. And we need to sort of try to move the world forward in some of these important policy areas. But I think, we always say this, and I've done this now, I think 7 years, these Sherpa, these G7 and G20 processes. We always look at that sort of as you go over the years as a sequence of things, take the issue of climate change in previous years. You know, we worked on the G7, we worked on the G20, we had the Paris Agreement in 2015. So it's very much sort of a dynamic process, and the question is sort of, what can we do this year now, given where we are in the G20 context? So that's going to be interesting. In terms of the process, and I'll get to my 4 points in a second. In terms of the process, we are sort of very much at the end of it. We're having these Sherpa meetings. Sherpas are the ones, I'm doing this for Germany, who are preparing the summit for the leaders. We've had the first one in December, so we've had several of them. We've had 3, and we'll have one more just before the summit. We'll meet just on the 4th before the summit. So we are in the process of, you know, getting to the important things, to the nitty-gritty things, to working on language, thinking about what we can do. But it's been a massive process, and with the help also of the T20, we've moved it forward. And now, of course, it comes to the point where things are most important, and we'll see. We've also had a number of other meetings. Let me make my 4 points. I think the 4 points are, you know, I think there's a debate we're having, and I couldn't have been here so far for this conference, but I know Peter Altmaier, the head of the Chancellery, was here today, and you know, the Chancellor also sends her regards. Of course, I should have said that. We are actually, I think, at a position where both the G7 and the G20, I think, are more needed than ever. So, you know, point number 1, if, you know, we don't agree on everything, which was, so for example, in climate, quite obvious in the G7 context, it doesn't mean that these things are useless. In fact, if we agreed on everything, we don't really need to have these meetings. So I think, you know, I rather agree than not agree, but you know, but that's not a choice. That's a policy choice of democratically elected governments, what their positions are. But then I think, you know, if you don't agree on things, it's very important that you discuss it. Now, whether it will have an impact on policy decisions is yet another question, an interesting question. I think we all have to ask ourselves that. But I think, you know, just because you don't agree on everything, actually we agree on most of the things, even in the G7, most in Gänsefüßchen, as we say in German, in quotes. But you know, it's important to have these things. So I think the G20 will be challenging. It's an opportunity, and it's very important. I think that we have that. By the way, the theme, as you know, of the G20 is shaping an interconnected world. I think this is a great theme. We sort of picked that a long time ago. Didn't know we were going to be where we would be now. But I think that hits it very well. And it's in Hamburg, which is an open city, a trading city. It's got, you know, one of the biggest ports in Europe. I think it's the 3rd biggest port or the 2nd biggest port in Europe. So this openness, multilateralism is important. And I think the G20, which is not a hard legal entity, it's not the EU or NATO, and it doesn't or the UN, it doesn't replace those either. There's also been discussions that, you know, from some people that is just taking away, you know, muscle from other institutions. It's very different. It's a political statement, and, you know, that's fine. And it's not a formal process either, and it's a presidential-driven process. And I think that's perfect for its niche. But I know, you know, there's a discussion on that. So I think point number 1, I think G20 is amazingly important this year, not easy, and we have to see what we achieve. A second point I'd like to make, and I'm not going to go into the German agenda, you all know that. We are in the middle of negotiating what we will say on each of these issues, and I can't tell you where we are in these negotiations either, because, you know, these are, you know, that's the way negotiations are. But I think if you look at the G20 and its history, maybe most of you know that, and I feel very good, I'm an economist, is it has really evolved in terms of addressing important issues in the world. It started off looking at the financial crisis. It used to be a financial ministers process, as you know. It's been pulled up in 2008 with Washington, the first G20 summit, to the leaders level. Financial market regulation, tax issues still amazingly important, I think, and also global growth and inclusive growth and many of these sort of, very important issues are there. But we've also moved into other areas. We moved into climate, we moved into development issues, which are in a way also growth issues. I think they're more than just growth, but they're also very important for growth. We'll be pushing the women's issue, which I think even for a country like Germany is very important for growth. If we don't have all talent participating in an aging society like in Germany, we're not going to raise our potential growth rate, which is only 1%, by the way, in Germany. We have the health issue on the table, which was not easy, actually. Not all member states were equally positive about putting health on the agenda. It's something the Chancellor has taken very seriously. We'll see how it will evolve in the future. Terrorism. So there's a number of very important issues which world leaders are discussing. So it's not just, let's say, a narrow economic forum, but it looks at the important issues of the world. And that I think is fine, and I think human rights and many issues are being discussed in the G20, and we sort of the idea is that we set a political message which is then implemented and propagated in other fora. The G20 is not really there to implement things. I think we should be doing more on accountability, and I think we're doing some, but we could be doing more. Also, the question is, how is the accountability organized and who's doing it? These are issues you probably have discussed, but I think that in terms of the topics, we go where, what the important topics are, and we feel very good about that. Sometimes I'm asked, what is the one topic which the G20 is going to address? Usually, it's important afterwards also for sort of communication is what is the big thing. And you never know this really in advance. It's very often changes even, something may happen before the summit. It has happened many times before that something happened just before the summit, has dominated the summit. Of course, you plan this, but I think, being a former academic myself, I think if you have a number of very important policy issues where you move the world a little bit in a political way, not in a legal way, and it's many issues, but even, a little bit in all these issues, this is maybe not a huge political success, but I think it's actually, from a point of view you want to improve things, I think it's actually also a good thing. So we have a fairly rich agenda where we try to push and see, and we may not be able to get things everywhere. By the way, we've stuck to our agenda. We didn't change it at all. It's the same agenda we introduced essentially in December in terms of areas. Of course, we've been very open towards taking on initiatives, and we continue working on implementing those. But we haven't sort of said, no, we're not going to talk about climate change because we can't agree on it. We'll have to see whether we agree on it or not, but no, we stuck to our knitting and we do the agenda, and there's actually a lot of continuity. We always, I've done it 7 years. I think in terms of standing Sherpa, I'm the oldest serving Sherpa of the 20, which says more about the leaders than it says about me because they change a lot. In the last, yes, I get to, this is my second point, and I have 2 more points. Yes, so this is my old home. I think I can abuse my presidential powers from... Okay, so topics are, I think, important, and we move on. The other one is, I think, the governance of the G20. And I know that, we have the presidential process, the leaders of the meeting of the leaders. We have the president's meeting, which are about the ministers, which is about, and we have these dialogues with the civil society. And, again, my point of view is what I said before, is that we should have it a presidentially driven process. And I know you've been discussing that. Maybe I leave this up for the discussion. I'm sure we're getting into that. We also have to be careful that the G20 process is focused enough on what the output is. And I think output can be many things. It can be the communiqué. It can be a discussion in policymakers, it can be a discussion in multipliers, it can be informing the public at large. You have to define what your output is. And we have to be mindful of that. I have some strong views on that, which I will not say now, given that I'm getting pressure from the left, which I always get pressure from the left, being a more right-wing economist. So I think this is important. I think let me leave it at that. That's my last point. So it's about this governance issue. And okay, final point is that we take this dialogue with the civil society extremely serious. The German presidency has spent a lot of time and effort. We've invited you in also to participate in the Sherpa meeting. Peter Altmaier was here today. So I think we've taken that very seriously, and we wanted to be more inclusive, perhaps as a mark of the German presidency, and I hope we were successful in that one. Let me leave it at that. Thank you very much.